You ever wake up excited for a weekend just to have it stomped on by a woman named Cheryl? It started on a Saturday morning. I had just pitched a brand new canvas tent by the lake behind my house. I live in a quiet neighborhood in northern Georgia, and our lakeside lots technically count as part of our backyards. I bought this property 10 years ago specifically for that lake access. Fishing, camping, bonfires with my daughter, priceless stuff. Anyway, the tent was for my weekend with my daughter, Leela. She's 11 and thinks camping next to water is the coolest thing ever. We'd planned it for weeks, sleeping bags, marshmallows, a little solar lantern, the works. I was inside making sandwiches when I heard tearing, not rustling, tearing. I sprinted out the back door and there she was, Cheryl Danvers. Middle-aged, bleached blonde bob, pastel cardigan in 90-degree weather, and a clipboard like it was surgically attached to her hand. She was slicing through the side of my tent with garden shears. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward her. "This structure is unauthorized and non-compliant with HOA guidelines," Cheryl snapped without even looking at me. "Temporary shelters are prohibited on shared natural resources." "It's not a shared resource," I said, trying to keep my voice down because of Leela. "That's my backyard. My property line ends 3 feet past that oak tree, you know that." She didn't even blink. "The HOA board voted last month to redefine lakefront boundaries for uniformity. You would know that if you attended meetings, Mr. Thatcher." I stared at her. "You're telling me the HOA decided to annex part of my backyard? It's not annexing, it's preserving. Your tent violates aesthetic harmony. This is clearly illegal and I'm within my rights." I took out my phone and started recording. Cheryl, mid-slice, froze. "Destruction of private property is a crime," I said. "That tent cost me $300 and you just slashed a hole through it." "I had to," she said, lowering the shears. "You were warned." "No, I wasn't, and I'm calling the sheriff." Her face paled just a little. "You wouldn't dare." I looked her dead in the eye. "Try me." She turned and walked off like she hadn't just vandalized my stuff in broad daylight. Leela came outside, hugging her stuffed octopus, staring at the torn tent like someone had just kicked her dog. "Daddy, what happened?" I knelt next to her. "Nothing we can't fix, sweetheart. Go grab your water bottle. We're gonna take a little detour before our campout." I was already dialing the sheriff's office. Cheryl thought she was untouchable because she chaired the HOA board, but I'd been documenting her nonsense for months. And this time, she'd gone too far. Deputy Morales showed up 20 minutes later. He parked by the mailbox, walked the short gravel path to the backyard, and raised an eyebrow at the sight of the sliced canvas, which now sagged like a deflated balloon. Leela sat on the porch steps, quietly munching a peanut butter sandwich, watching everything like it was some kind of outdoor courtroom drama. I handed Morales my phone. Caught her in the act. She used garden shears. Didn't even knock. He tapped the screen to start the video and watched silently, his expression unreadable. When it ended, he looked up. "That's her in the video?" he asked. I nodded. "Cheryl Danvers. She lives 2 doors down, head of the HOA board." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "You want to press charges? She destroyed private property on my land. Of course I do." He looked at the tent again, then back at the phone and nodded. "All right, I'll need a written statement, and I'll be paying her a visit next." Leela tugged on my sleeve. "Will she go to jail?" I crouched next to her. "That's up to the law, honey, but nobody gets to cut up our stuff just because they feel like it." Back inside, I filled out the incident report while Morales stepped out. He was gone less than half an hour. When he came back, he wasn't alone. Cheryl stood beside him, arms crossed like she was trying to hold herself together. Her cardigan was gone, replaced by a sleeveless blouse, and her clipboard had vanished. Morales gestured toward me. "He's filing charges." "You want to explain what made you think you had the right to go into someone's yard and destroy their property?" Her eyes flicked between us. "I was enforcing compliance. That tent was in violation of the revised lakefront guidelines. The board passed it unanimously." "The board doesn't override private property laws," Morales said. HOA bylaws don't give you the right to trespass or damage personal belongings. Her mouth opened, then closed. She inhaled sharply. You don't understand. That land is under HOA jurisdiction now. I stood up. No, it's not. I checked the county assessor's office last month. My deed includes that strip of land down to the waterline. The HOA can't just redraw boundaries because they feel like it. Morales nodded. He's right, ma'am. That's a civil matter. You had no legal authority to step onto his property. Cheryl's jaw tightened. This is an overreaction. I was protecting the neighborhood aesthetic. Morales pulled out a small notepad. Let me make this very clear. This isn't about neighborhood aesthetics. It's about destruction of property, trespassing, and possibly criminal mischief. You're lucky he didn't file for more. She shifted her weight, suddenly looking less sure of herself. I didn't think he'd actually, but I did. I cut in. And I'll do it again if I have to. Something in her posture changed. Her shoulders sagged just enough to show the cracks in the armor. Morales took her back to his cruiser to issue a citation and finish his report. I didn't expect what came next. An hour later, I got a call from my neighbor, Mark. He sounded rattled. Hey, just a heads up, he said. There's a special HOA meeting tonight, emergency session. Cheryl's trying to push some kind of retroactive fine policy. Said it'll cover unsanctioned structures that violate the new shoreline layout. I blinked. She's doubling down, worse, he said. She's trying to push it through without a vote, just a board decision. Claims the incident with your tent was a catalyst for new enforcement. I stared out the window. Tell everyone who'll listen, I'll be there. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse at 7 sharp. I arrived early with a manila folder under my arm and a stack of printed documents from the county's land surveyor's office. I had every square foot of my lot mapped and notarized. The room filled fast. Word got around. People were curious and angry. Cheryl sat at the head table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She had a new stack of documents in front of her and a smug kind of calmness that made my stomach twist. She tapped a pen against her legal pad. This emergency session is in response to recent disruptions along the lakeside properties. Effective immediately, the HOA board will implement a fine structure for unauthorized alterations or installations that interfere with the communal view and accessibility of the lake. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I stood. Point of order. This is not a communal lake. Every homeowner on the perimeter owns their portion of the shoreline. The HOA can't fine people for what they do on their own land. Cheryl smiled without humor. That's not entirely accurate. The board has agreed to redefine the lake access as a shared amenity. It's a matter of community interest. I held up the folder. Then explain this. County records, dated and certified, showing property lines and ownership. My backyard includes the stretch where the tent was. You have no jurisdiction there. I handed copies to the board members. One of them, a retired dentist named Glenn, squinted at the pages and frowned. This doesn't match what you sent us, he said to Cheryl. She stiffened. That's because the county hasn't updated the GIS registry yet. I pointed at the signature line. It's been verified. You can't change land ownership with a vote. That's real estate fraud. That silenced the room. A woman near the back raised her hand. Are you saying the HOA tried to take people's land without legal transfers? Cheryl's voice was thinner now. It was a clarification. For consistency. Another voice chimed in. So now we're being fined for things on our own property? Glenn looked at Cheryl. Did you file anything with the county clerk? She didn't answer. By the time the meeting ended, 3 homeowners had filed formal complaints. Glenn promised to suspend the fine policy pending review. Cheryl said nothing, but her face was the color of chalk. The next morning, I got another visit from Deputy Morales. This time, he wasn't alone. A plainclothes investigator from the county's fraud division stood beside him. We had a look at the HOA filings, he explained. There's irregularities. Some of the property boundary changes were submitted without owner consent. That's a felony under Georgia code. I nodded. I figured. She thought she could rewrite landlines with a pen and some stationery. They asked for a statement and made copies of everything I'd given the board. That afternoon, Cheryl was escorted from her house in handcuffs. Not for the tent she destroyed. That was just the tip of the iceberg. Turns out, she'd been submitting altered maps and forging board member initials for months, trying to reclassify parts of at least 6 lakeside properties. The goal? Shrink private lots just enough to justify HOA control over the shore. They found everything in her home office: draft letters, doctored plats, even emails to a surveyor she tried to bribe into backing her claims. The headlines came fast. Local news stations ran the story for 3 days straight. HOA president arrested in property theft scheme, they called it. By the weekend, the remaining board members had resigned. A special election was scheduled, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to the people who actually lived there. Layla and I pitched a new tent by the lake that Sunday night. She added a battery-powered lantern shaped like a dolphin and fell asleep to the sound of tree frogs. No one came to tear it down. Not anymore. By midweek, the neighborhood had turned into something between a courthouse lobby and a town hall revival. Cars slowed down in front of my house, drivers staring toward the lakeside like they expected to see crime scene tape fluttering in the breeze. I didn't blame them. The whole Cheryl ordeal had shaken people, not just because she got caught, but because they hadn't seen it coming. I was raking leaves by the back fence when Mark walked over from next door, holding a thick manila envelope under his arm. "You got a minute?" he asked, glancing toward the lake. "Sure," I said, leaning the rake against the tree. "You look like you just walked out of a deposition." He handed me the envelope. "You should see this. My cousin works in the county records department. After everything blew up with Cheryl, I asked him to dig into any filings the HOA made in the last year. This is the mess they tried to bury." I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photocopied documents. At first glance, they looked like standard HOA paperwork: event permits, budget proposals, architectural approvals. But then I noticed the signatures. The same 3 names kept popping up on every page, regardless of the topic: Cheryl Danvers, Greg Tully, and Dana Wilcox. "Weren't Greg and Dana just regular board members?" I asked. "Supposedly," Mark said. "But they were co-signing everything like they were the governing body. No votes, no minutes, no notices to residents. It's like they were running a shadow board." I flipped through more pages. One document stood out immediately: a lease agreement for a private landscaping company to perform shoreline beautification along the lake. The contract was for $26,000. No bids, no community approval. "Did this work ever happen?" I asked. "Not even a shovel," Mark said. "The company doesn't exist." I called the phone number on the contract. It rang through to a disconnected line. My cousin traced the LLC paperwork. "Guess who filed it?" I looked up. "Dana Wilcox," he nodded. "Registered 3 months ago, fake address, no business license." I stared at the contract again. Everything about it was designed to look legitimate. Watermarks, notary stamps, the whole 9 yards. But once you started peeling it back, it unraveled like cheap wallpaper. "We need to get this to the county investigator," I said. "Now." Mark and I drove downtown that afternoon and handed everything over to Investigator Lanning, the same plainclothes officer who'd accompanied Deputy Morales earlier in the week. He took one look at the documents and opened a drawer full of similar folders. "We've been collecting statements from other homeowners," he said. "But this helps connect it all. The fake landscaping contract ties the financial misconduct directly to the board's internal decisions. That elevates this from property mismanagement to organized fraud." He made a copy of everything and handed us a case number. "You might want to keep your heads down for a few days. There's a chance we'll have to issue subpoenas, and not everyone's going to like that." I wasn't worried about who liked it. That night, 2 more neighbors knocked on my door. The first was a retired Air Force mechanic named Dale, who lived across the lake. He brought photos high-resolution shots taken with a telephoto lens mounted to his second-story window. They showed Cheryl and Dana standing behind the clubhouse dumpster late at night, stuffing binders and bankers' boxes into black trash bags. "These were taken 4 nights ago," Dale said. "Before she got arrested. I didn't think much of it until I saw the news. Figured you might know who to give them to." The second visitor was someone I hadn't spoken to before, a woman named Elise who lived 2 streets up. She was one of the few renters in the neighborhood and had kept quiet during most of the HOA drama. But now she held out a flash drive. "My roommate used to date Greg Tully," she said. Before they broke up, he was always bragging about how much money he was making from HOA side deals. She got suspicious and started recording their conversations. "I think there's stuff on here that'll make your head spin." We turned the recordings over the next morning. They were worse than I expected. In one clip, Greg talked casually about rerouting HOA funds through dummy maintenance invoices. In another, he laughed about shaking down a homeowner for a bogus fence violation just to collect the fine. But the one that sealed it was a 10-minute recording of a phone call between Greg and Cheryl. They talked about the fake landscaping contract like it was a joke how they planned to pocket the money, then blame cost overruns on supplier delays. Cheryl even said, "No one reads those financials anyway. They're just glad we plant tulips once a year." Investigator Lanning picked up the flash drive himself that afternoon. He didn't say much, but the look on his face said plenty. By Friday morning, 2 more warrants had been issued, one for Greg Tully, the other for Dana Wilcox. Both were picked up without incident. Greg was arrested outside a gym in town. Dana was found at her sister's house an hour away trying to clear her head. The story exploded after that. Local media ran follow-ups on the arrests. A state senator called for a review of HOA oversight laws. People from other neighborhoods started showing up at our community clubhouse, asking how we'd managed to expose it all, but we weren't done yet. The county scheduled a public hearing to determine if the HOA's charter should be suspended entirely. It was a rare move, something usually reserved for organizations that had completely lost the trust of their members. I was asked to testify. The hearing was held at a municipal building downtown. The room was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. A panel of 5 county officials sat behind a long oak table, a court stenographer tapping away beside them. I was sworn in and handed a folder of exhibits, copies of the fake contracts, audio transcripts, property records, and the video of Cheryl destroying my tent. One of the commissioners leaned forward. "Mr. Thatcher, in your opinion, was this an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern?" I didn't hesitate. It was systematic. They used their positions to manipulate policy, fabricate violations, and siphon money from residents. The tent was just the first time someone caught them in the act. Another commissioner asked, "Do you believe the HOA board acted with intent to deceive homeowners?" "Yes," I said, "and they relied on the assumption that no one would challenge them." That silence meant approval. The panel deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the lead commissioner stood and read the decision aloud. "In light of sustained evidence of fraud, abuse of authority, and financial misconduct, the county hereby suspends the current HOA charter for the Lakeside Haven Community Association, effective immediately. A court-appointed receiver will manage all HOA responsibilities until a new board is elected under direct supervision." The room erupted in applause. Afterward, people approached me in the parking lot, shaking my hand, slapping me on the back. A few asked if I'd consider running for the new board. I told them I'd think about it. Honestly, I just wanted a weekend where I could pitch a tent without needing a lawyer on standby. The next Saturday, I did exactly that. Leela and I set up our new tent, this time a sturdier canvas model with reinforced seams, and built a stone fire ring near the water's edge. She roasted marshmallows while I fished, and for the first time in a long time, the lake felt like ours again. No clipboard. No shears. No one lurking behind oak trees with a rulebook and a grudge. Just a father and daughter, a quiet lake, and a neighborhood that had finally remembered who it belonged to. The following week, the temporary receiver assigned by the county held his first open office hours inside the now quiet clubhouse. His name was Boyd Hensley, a retired municipal finance auditor with a permanent squint and a habit of tapping a red pen against his clipboard. He wore a short-sleeved button-down tucked into khakis and introduced himself as someone who's allergic to nonsense. "Rest assured," he said to the 10 of us who showed up early, "I've seen worse." But not by much. He let the sarcasm hang for half a beat before passing out forms, voluntary testimonies, property boundaries, and a call for replacement board candidates. Everyone in the room looked like they'd aged 5 years since the last HOA election. Most of us were still waiting to see if we'd been billed for any of the fake maintenance contracts that never happened. Boyd waved a stack of financial statements. "I'm auditing every line item. If you paid into this HOA in the last 12 months, you'll know exactly where your money went. And if it went anywhere it shouldn't have, you'll get it back plus interest if I can swing it." A woman named Nora from across the street leaned forward. "What about the people who approved the checks? There were others on that board. They had to know." Boyd nodded once. "We're examining that. If there's willful negligence or blind signatures, they'll be held accountable. No one's skating." Mark nudged me with his elbow. "Think we'll get reimbursed for all the fines they made up," Boyd overheard and raised his pen. "If you've got documentation of any fines issued without due process, bring it to me. I'm building a restitution ledger." I didn't have to be asked twice. I'd kept every notice, every inspection slip, every envelope with those passive-aggressive stamps. That night, I laid it all out on my dining room table and put together a timeline, each violation letter paired with a map, surveillance footage, or a county zoning ordinance. I labeled them by date and violation code. By the time I was done, I had enough to fill a banker's box. 2 days later, I carried it into Boyd's temporary office. He looked at the box, then at me. "You brought receipts," he muttered. "Better than that," I said. "I brought proof they never expected anyone to read the rules they were quoting." He went through the top layer with a practiced eye. "This'll help, especially if we move to recover funds through the civil courts." "Civil?" I asked. "Not criminal," he tilted his head. "In parallel. The DA's office is still processing the fraud charges, but civil restitution's faster, goes straight to the victims." I tapped the box. "Start with the families they fined for fences and swing sets. They were easy targets." Boyd nodded slowly. "We will." By Friday, the county announced the date of the new HOA board election. No campaigning, no flyers, just nominations and sealed ballots overseen by a third-party mediator. A lot of people assumed I'd run. I didn't. Instead, I nominated Nora, who'd spent the last 6 years quietly helping neighbors file repair permits and navigate zoning paperwork when the old board ignored their calls. She didn't talk much, but she listened, and that was enough. The day before the election, a man I'd never seen before knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Detective Rowe with the county's Financial Crimes Division. He wore a plain navy suit and carried a slim black folder under one arm. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Your documentation helped us connect Cheryl's phone records to 2 contractors who'd been funneling money through fake invoices." I stepped onto the porch. "They've been arrested." He flipped open the folder and showed me a list of names. 2 this morning, 1 more likely by Monday. We also confirmed that Greg Tully wired over $12,000 to a personal account in Belize. "Did you recover anything?" "Not yet," he said, "but the judge froze their assets. Cheryl's house is under lien until the trial's over." "What's the timeline?" "We're aiming to bring charges before the end of the quarter. Multiple counts: wire fraud, conspiracy, criminal misappropriation of HOA funds. The DA's planning to make an example of them." I exhaled slowly. "Good." He handed me a card. If you remember anything else, anything you haven't already passed on, call me. I will. As he turned to leave, Leela stepped onto the porch behind me. She had a shoebox in her hands, filled with smooth stones she'd collected from the lakeshore. She looked up at me, then at the detective. Are the people who broke our tent going to jail? Ro crouched to her level. They're going to court first, then a judge will decide what happens. She nodded solemnly. Okay. That weekend, the election went off without incident. Nora was voted in unanimously. 2 other new members joined her, both longtime residents who'd never previously considered volunteering but now felt like they couldn't sit back anymore. The clubhouse was quiet during the announcement, but afterward, people lingered. They talked. Real conversations, not just complaints. It was like someone had cracked open a window after years of stale air. Nora walked up to me near the coffee table and held out a sealed envelope. This is yours. I opened it. Inside was a check. Reimbursement for every fine and fee I'd been charged under the previous board. Boyd says there's more coming once the assets are liquidated, she said. This is just the beginning. I didn't do it for the money, I said. I know, Nora replied. That's why you deserve it. Later that night, I walked down to the lake alone. The tent had been packed away, but the fire ring was still there, cold and gray from the last marshmallow roast. I sat on the old folding chair and listened to the water slap against the bank. It was quiet now. No one watching, no one waiting to pounce over a misplaced chair or a hanging bird feeder. The lake had always been there. It just took a battle to remind everyone who it belonged to. I heard footsteps behind me, soft ones. Leela. Can we camp again next weekend? She asked, already pulling her hoodie over her head. I looked at the stars blinking above the tree line. Yeah, I said, we can.